Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is George and I'm joined by Dave. And today we're going to be talking about how businesses are using live video to get results and what those results might mean. Your mileage may vary on the results you're looking for. And we want to talk all about that today. So I see lots of people jumping in saying hi in chat. I see that our viewer numbers are still going up, so we're going to hang out for a few moments, wait for a few more people to join so people don't get left behind. But I see people saying hi from all over the US, like LA, Wisconsin, Seattle, other people from the Czech Republic, Mexico, Portugal, Croatia. So it's great to see everyone. Really appreciate you joining us today. Just to let you know, we will have some Q&A stuff that is available there in Crowdcast. You can ask questions there in chat or in the Q&A panel. Feel free to do so as we go along. We'll also put up a number of polls during this as well. There should be up one now asking about what industry you are in. So go ahead and weigh in on that. And we'll have a number of others throughout today's presentation. So we're still getting a few people coming in. Yeah, we'll just hang out for a few more moments.
I think the first poll is just a pretty generic one, just trying to find out what industry everybody is from. When we get into the presentation, obviously we're trying to address a wide variety. Businesses of all kinds are using video. So first question is really just to try to understand who's tuned in and what industry you're kind of working in, and we'll have some more detailed ones later about what you're doing with video. But first, we just want to figure out who you are. What's your business category?
Yeah, it's really interesting to know because so many businesses are using video in so many different ways. It's an interesting study to see the cross section of which ones are using it more extensively, either already or considering moving into it. So it is actual valuable information for everyone that helps us quite a bit. So that's great. So weigh in on that poll. And of course, as you see the other ones, I'll try to announce them as they are added throughout the presentation today. But definitely as you see those pop up, weigh in on those. And again, use the Q&A panel. So I'm still getting a few more people trickling in here. So we'll get started in another minute or two and get going once people have settled in a little bit more. But a little more of an introduction. Once again, my name is George, and I manage the support department here at Epiphan Video, and joined by Dave.
Yeah, so I lead the marketing group here at Epiphan. So that's includes the support team, but also sort of what products we're bringing to market, and how our customers are using all those products. So these webinars are great. We get to share a little bit of what we've learned, but we also learn from you through the polls and the questions that you ask, and helps us really refine our view of what customers need and what they're thinking about. And so these webinars are great for us to kind of interact and get some feedback.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely we have different pieces to add to the conversation today, and obviously our own experience in how video has helped us within our business, including doing things like webinars like we are right now. So, all right. Number of people joining has started to slow down a little bit. We're 5 past, so let's jump into it. So today's topic, once again, we are talking about how businesses are using live video to get results. And again, we're going to touch on what results mean for different industries and different ways of using that video. Today's agenda is basically broken down into 5 parts. We're going to be looking at first, how to leverage video for internal communications. Second part, we will look at external applications for using video. The third, we'll talk about leveraging maybe on-premise video studios and how that relates to both of the previous two. Of course, live event production is a whole other area. And then, of course, last but not least, we will get to your questions. So make sure you throw those into the Q&A panel. So Kicking it off, internal communications and using video within your company. This is maybe one of the areas where people start, and maybe one of the first layers. So, Dave, maybe tell us a little bit more about what that might look like.
Yeah, I think a lot of companies over the last while have started to transition. Certainly, with the first category, which is training and onboarding, that's a big one that we see companies tackle first. Partly because when you're onboarding a new employee, you want it to be visual. You don't want it all reading and text based and that kind of thing. So obviously, visual communications is very important. And training can be, as we dig into these in more detail, training can be a very expensive proposition if there's travel and other things involved. So remote training has become super popular, and that's often where we see people start. And then the second category is one that everybody, in this environment is very familiar with, is kind of the remote collaboration, and whether that's through a Zoom meeting or other tools that you're using to work virtually with people that aren't in the same room. That's becoming more and more important. We've seen a number of companies move towards that independent of all of this kind of COVID stuff beforehand. And that's certainly accelerated in the last couple months as people learn how to work in this environment.
And I think we're
And
going to continue to see that happen even after things go back to normal or whatever normal is going to look like. I think we'll continue to see that accelerate.
yeah, and when we see a lot of people had plans to expand and plans to do more, and this has really just forced them to do it now. And as you say, I think that will continue. And typically with things like video, there's a learning curve at the beginning, but once you get your feet wet, then you usually jump right in because the benefits are pretty huge once you figure out how to do it. And so the other couple categories we've got up there is kind of executive messages and corporate updates or departmental updates. Same thing, they can be done text-based. You can send out an email and say, here's what we want to do this month, or here's our target, or here's how things are going. But it's much nicer to have that in a visual format and be able to even if it's a one-way pure broadcast transmission, just being able to see the person speak gives that sense of personalization that just isn't there in an email. And then that leads to more kind of interactive corporate messaging, and that's typically leads to things like town hall meetings where there's kind of multiple presentations usually, and then a true feedback from employees to ask questions and raise issues and that kind of thing. And so we see companies doing all of these things, some are just starting on the training side and then getting into more of the messaging and town hall kind of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And for us, as a company, we do all of these. So, it
Yeah, we've
definitely
done
helps.
those for quite a while, and I would say, like most companies, we started with kind of mostly the onboarding and that kind of thing, and then worked our way through those other categories. Um, so if we look at training and onboarding specifically, and what's really driving that, and where the benefits are, I'll talk about the last one first. Is cost effectiveness. Flying people to a site to have on-site training, it's a great experience. You meet people face to face. There's no doubt there's value in that, but it can be very expensive. So it's not always warranted. And a lot of times what we're seeing is it creates a delay because people say, oh, well, I'm going to be in town, 2 months from now. I'll do that training then. Whereas if you say, well, we've got video training, do the training now, and then we can touch up on that training later, it accelerates things. So that gets to the second one, which is convenience. It can be done anywhere. And if you're doing it not live, if it's VOD, it really can be done at any time. And that can be, kind of any time of the week or month, but also any time of day. So if you've got time zone issues that you're dealing with, video, at least recorded video, really helps take care of that. So those are big ones. And consistency is also another point where once you've recorded that video or you have a script and you're producing it, it tends to be a lot more consistent. And we find as people start to use video more formally, they push that consistency because they start to go, well, what do we want the look of this thing to be, and how do we want to introduce these topics? And so they start to think more about consistency when it's not just a bunch of people walking in a room and every day is different. when suddenly when you start to put it on video, you start to think about consistency, and that adds value for people who are watching a series of videos over time, that things look consistent and they're presented in a similar way. So there's a number of advantages to the onboarding one, but generally people get started because of the cost effectiveness and the convenience.
Yeah, absolutely. So we did just put up a new poll with the question, does your company use video for training or onboarding? So weigh in on that in the poll section if that's something that you're currently doing. Um, you know, this is something that, you know, again, not everyone is necessarily doing yet, but we certainly have seen a huge increase in this. You know, obviously many companies are unfortunately shrinking at the moment, not necessarily growing. So onboarding might not be part of it, but you know, all employees are stronger when there's a continuous training regime happening, and you know, video and content like that, or you know, collaboration is a big way to make that happen very easily, especially in these challenging times. Um, and the collaboration one, I think, largely comes from the tools that we're pretty familiar with. You know, virtual meetings is a huge part of this.
Yeah, and this is a natural one, right? Because unlike training where you might have a giant sales conference every quarter and bring people in for training or that kind of thing. The day-to-day meetings and things that happen there, you're not going to travel for those. So people have had to figure out, how do we do that? And it used to just be everyone crowds around the Polycom and it's all voice based, but that is moving, and everything is really moving very quickly to video. I think there's very few companies these days that don't have easy facilities for employees to hop in a meeting room and do a video call. And and even if that meeting room doesn't exist, doing it just on your laptop at your desk is feasible these days too, and for pretty low cost as well.
Yeah, and obviously, most immediately, you know, in the current conditions, many people find themselves in right now with, you know, isolation orders and things like that. People are doing it from home, and you know, we've heard about many companies that, as they've discovered, you know, these tools and the effectiveness of people working from home, um, that may become a more permanent scenario for many people, or at least a part-time scenario in a much more real way going forward. And so, you know, looking at this and making sure that people are equipped to do it effectively can be very important to many different businesses in different ways. So I have just a quick note here. I have seen people answering the poll question in chat. Just click on the poll section and answer it there and vote in that poll. Don't need to answer it in chat. You can vote in the poll section there. Um, yeah, so you know, as Dave was saying, you know, there's obviously the more traditional small huddle rooms or bigger boardrooms or any of these things that have always been kind of equipped with some sort of conferencing gear, but maybe improving that or leveraging that for additional pieces is something that we're seeing quite a lot and continuing to grow. One of the easy ways to kind of approach this, though, from maybe just an individual office or for many of the home users, um, is to use things like capture cards to really increase the video call quality. You know, when we're doing these video calls, webcams are plentiful, or at least they were until they all sold out due to COVID. Uh, but most people's laptops have one built in, for example. But generally speaking, with few exceptions, many of the PC laptop webcams that are built in are pretty bad, and the positioning on all laptops, unless you have a specific stand and space setup, the angles are not good. They're not good at low light. They're not very adjustable, so they're not ideal. I mean, they do in a pinch, and they're effective for quickly talking to people. But if we're talking about leveraging video from a professional business standpoint, especially conducting a webinar or anything like that, we want to elevate that game a little bit and make everything look better. And one of the quickest and easiest ways to do that is with a capture card connected to your computer that you can then use in that conferencing software. With a capture card, it means that you can bring in a higher quality camera signal or even other types of video signals to include within your bigger presentation. In terms of cameras, I mean, there's lots of options for that. And this is actually something that both Dave and I are doing right now at the moment. to make sure that we're kind of using the best quality camera we can with, the right ranging, improved lighting, and things along those lines to clean up that visual quality.
Yeah, and that doesn't always need to be a very expensive camera. It's just the act of
No.
getting the camera off the laptop and placing it where you want it to be is a big part of it. And certainly, I mean, there's a whole range of cameras you can work with, but this approach of just getting it off of the laptop allows you then to use your laptop the way you most want to use it, which is to look at the screen and manipulate that, and you can position the screen how it's most comfortable for you to look at, not how it will position the camera for others to look at you. And so it doesn't need to be really an expensive camera. It just getting that camera out of the laptop and having a separate camera, it goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Because in some cases, maybe you don't want the laptop directly in front of you. You might want it off to the side. But of course, if you're trying to use the camera built into it, you're just getting the side of your face, which is, maybe not your best side.
Yeah.
So those are definite considerations. And in this setup we have here, we're specifically talking about a way of setting up something for executive messaging. But the picture we have on this slide is a great representation of a way of setting up, honestly, a very simple design using a higher quality camera, shooting someone sitting at a desk, and it just adds to the dimension of what they're doing. So it can be a great piece. And as Dave mentioned earlier, providing things like executive messaging in a video format is much more engaging than just getting, essentially a newsletter. People don't tend to read those; they just delete them or ignore them, and they got more important emails to get to. Is how they feel. Whereas a video, you might take the time, even over your lunch break or something like that, to sit down and watch it and engage with it at a different level.
Yeah, and I think one of the things mentioned on this slide is this gives you the ability to create a set, and that set can communicate a mood, right? So if you want a kind of relaxed casual town hall feel, then you can create that, and that helps the message get across in the manner that you want. So it's more than just having a good angle on the person who's speaking. It's what else do you want to fill that frame with, and what approach does that make? Does it look very serious and authoritative, or is it very kind of casual and campy? It really depends on what the communication is, and we do see people really designing pretty inexpensive but effective spaces to get different kinds of messages across. And where we see people doing, say, a CEO corporate address versus, say, a sales target announcement or something, those are different kinds of messages with different kinds of tone. And it's very easy with a set like this to set the right tone, whether you want it to be casual, whether you want it to be more formal. So that's something to think about, and it goes a long way. And that's something that's very difficult to do in other media, especially something like email that's so text based. Changing that tone is difficult to do, but it's very
Yeah.
easily to do visually.
Well, it's funny. It reminds me of many years ago, working for some big companies in the past. One of the kind of jokes that was never really a joke when we went into an all hands meeting was, "What kind of snacks or food are they serving?" Because that's how you gauged the tone of what the results were going to be. If you walked into the room and there was a giant cake, it was probably good. If you walked in there and there was not much, well, you probably were getting laid off. And I feel like that's something that you can translate through video in a more modern context, right? If it's in terms of setting that mood, it becomes that food element, the visual element of what's happening for that messaging.
Yeah, it provides context. Um,
Absolutely.
and town hall meetings, as we discussed, are another kind of extension of that. Instead of the one-way broadcast of CEO message, it's more, okay, let's answer. Typically, it's let's answer the questions. Let's give out some information, maybe on whether it's quarterly results or whatever. But then it's the town hall meeting is really more meant to say, hey, we've got some news to share, but we want to hear your questions. We want to answer. We want to hear what you're thinking about. Um, and again, a lot of larger companies, it's a challenge to reach everybody. And again, visually streaming it is a really good way to do that. And as we're doing here, this is a one-way broadcast from a video point of view, but we've got polls and we've got chats, and there's lots of ways for people who are viewing this to interact. And we will get to those questions and we will answer and we will respond, so that the content gets kind of modified and delivered according to what the audience's feedback is. And so that's really, for me, the difference between the CEO message and the town hall is you're really using that feedback in real time to cater what your message is, and also to address concerns that arise. So that's doing these strictly by voice is, again, there's a lot you can discern from the intonation of a voice, but you add that visual element to it and you just get so much more communication. And companies which are global often will have many different regions around the world. And if, let's say, the company is German and that's kind of the native language, they'll have people all over the world who aren't necessarily native German speakers, and having that visual communication can give them clues that they wouldn't otherwise get if it was just written or just oral. So it can be really advantageous.
Yeah, and as more and more companies become more global, maybe all the executives aren't in one place, and you need to have this kind of global reach town hall, bring them together in something like a conference call, but then live stream that conference call to all employees, so that they can actually get that panel and everyone can be engaged, instead of maybe having one voice delivering everything. And that's something that we do internally quite a lot, because that is exactly the case for us, and making sure that the right voice is speaking to the right subject to deliver that to the employees can be important.
And these days, once you've set up your infrastructure to do that video streaming or sharing, it's very easy to record that as well and have it on hand for employees that join, next month or the month after, that might have missed that meeting. Very easy for them to then go back. And as we said, it's much more engaging if it's video based than if it's just audio or an email. So.
Yeah, and of course, these events, as the slide mentioned, these events, they can be very simple or they could be a huge spectacle. It's really your choice. And the difference between those in terms of setup and equipment actually doesn't have to be that different. It's just a question of how you want to leverage it. So in some cases, it could be leveraging hardware, like a hardware encoder for live streaming and recording. Plug in your different video signals, maybe multiple cameras, the presentation that's being used, your audio, running that all into a hardware encoder or a video switcher, depending on what you might need. And then, getting that final program feed, if you think of it from a broadcast perspective, into maybe a conference call or other tools potentially. In a one way, you don't necessarily need the conference call portion if it's a single speaker with a single one-way video communication. Then a hardware encoder just streams out to whatever platform you're using. But of course, there are ways to bridge those into other applications for more two-way for people with Zoom or WebEx or whatever you need. The advantage here of using a hardware encoder or a video switcher is, you can create a much more dynamic, engaging content, and you can live stream and record and potentially simultaneously bring it into video conferencing, all at the same time. And that gives you a lot of advantages in delivering that content in different ways. So in this case, this slide is using our Pearl Mini as the hardware encoder piece there, but that could maybe be represented by just a simple video switcher or another piece of gear. The concept is essentially the same. Bring as much dynamic content from cameras and video signals as you can into your production workflow, and then deliver it by whichever means makes the most sense for your viewers, as well as what tools you have on hand and how big the group is, or however that may play out.
Yeah, and one thing that may not be obvious to everyone here, and we're just getting to this next slide, is when we say streaming out to all employees, that doesn't necessarily imply that's over a public infrastructure like a YouTube or a Facebook channel. There are many ways you can reach out to those, and that could be an internal streaming server that you're hosting, or it could be these kind of tools like Panopto or Kaltura that are content management systems that manage people logging in. So it gives more security to the information that you're sharing and the streams that you're sending out there. But it also, provides that mechanism to distribute that worldwide. So it's a way to reach out in a more, I'll say, corporate way of doing it rather than a social media way of doing it. But the technology behind it is very similar. So
Yeah.
again, bringing sources in and switching them is all the same, whether you're going to YouTube or you're going to Kaltura or Panopto. The choice there is really what audience are you trying to reach, and what goals do you have around how you reach them.
Yeah, exactly. Kaltura and Panopto are great options, for a larger content management system. But we're seeing many companies today that are already leveraging, a Microsoft environment, for example. They
Right.
might be using Microsoft Teams for their video conferencing aspect, but usually as part of that suite, they also have access to Microsoft Stream, which is going to be an internal based CDN for redistributing just a one-to-many live stream, and fully integrated with those other Microsoft tools. So if you're in an enterprise that's the go-to, you can do that. We've seen many companies who are leveraging Facebook for Workplace, not regular Facebook, but
Yeah.
Workplace. And again, it offers this live streaming solution as well. So, there's a lot of ways, again, depending on the platform choices you may already be using within the corporation, to deliver that content, and really thinking about that. As Dave was saying, it's maybe too easy to fall into the expectations that it's going to be a social media based platform. And, at an enterprise level, that's not generally the case. You would see something else, even maybe a slightly more controllable one like a Vimeo Live would be a good choice, where you could have, login requirements and things like that, can really benefit. So we did put up a new poll. The question was, would your company CEO be interested in live streaming as a way of engaging employees? So in some cases, the answer is yes. In some cases, the answer is no. I know we've engaged with, a lot of companies that come from both of those answers. So weigh in on that in the poll section. Just open up that poll panel and give us your feedback on that. It's an interesting one to contemplate. And really give that one some thought, because there's a lot of different types of executives out there. Some that just are very hands off, and some that are very hands on. So,
Yeah.
and maybe this is a tool that would enable a more hands off executive to be more hands on, if it enables them to do it more often and easier.
I imagine there are a few that have kind of had to do it over the last couple months, imagining they never would. But it's interesting to know who's kind of really keen on the idea to go forward. It's one thing to do it in a unique scenario, but we see lots of people, once they try it, then they decide, what, that worked really well. It's quite effective. Once you've done it a couple times, it's not a lot of effort. So we do see people, once they get on that bandwagon, they kind of stay.
Yeah, exactly. So another one to consider, of course, is looking at, something beyond maybe just the employees, and maybe we want to look at investor updates or pitches for potential investors. That's another area where video can be a huge benefit. And again, maybe the travel is not going to be cost effective. So, what's your experience kind of using this?
Yeah, I think there's a few here. Investor updates and pitches were often traditionally done either in person or just by voice call. And when it's done in person, that's great. But as you say, that takes a lot of extra time and expense to fly there and get on premise and do all that. That's not always convenient or even possible. So we do see people resorting to more often the voice call version. But if you've ever been on one of those, you're mailing out the information in advance, and then you're asking people to follow along and go, okay, now I'm on page 26 and I'm looking at this chart. And so being able to have that quote in-room experience, or as close to it, with video, is a nice bridge in between those two kind of gaps. And and we do see a fair amount of people wanting to, again, set the right mood in what they're presenting so that it's not all, PowerPoint decks that have been mailed out and people are printing off. It's a lot more kind of interactive. It's a lot more like the live pitch. And it you want that two-way conversation. So again, it's from a structure point of view, it's like a mini town hall. There's information to be shared, but obviously it's got to be interactive as well. And we do see people moving to video for that. And you may have investors in different parts of the world, different time zones, and that kind of thing. Flying all over the world to do that is pretty costly and inefficient. So we do see video being a really great tool to keep it personal, but keep it current and be able to do it often.
Yeah, and it's if you think about this, anyone who's ever engaged with maybe a Kickstarter or something like that, crowdfunding is a great example of one of the ways where chances are, if you've ever backed a Kickstarter, think about whether or not you actually would have if they didn't have a video on the Kickstarter
Yeah.
talking about the pitch and what it was. Chances are you wouldn't have. If it was just text, there were no pictures, there was no video involved. I mean, that's not live, it's a VOD, but you probably wouldn't do it. And so, that's kind of a good way to look at this, is that if you're a larger enterprise, or if it's something super critical and you're targeting a very narrow focus of investors, doing it live is only going to make it that much more dynamic for those investors, much more interesting for them. And people interested, people engaged are more likely to participate, both communicating with you and with their dollars. So that's a critical piece. That in some ways you could say it's almost like clickbait, but it's also important to deliver that messaging, in the sense that if it wasn't there, they're probably just going to move along.
Yeah, and one really important element when it comes to investing and that kind of thing is the business plan and the numbers and things are extremely important. But in the end, you're investing in people to pull off whatever mission they have for the company, and it's the people you want to be able to see and get to know when you're putting your money in the company. And video just allows you to be a little more personable. Obviously the business case and the dollars have to make sense, but just letting it be a little more personable by sharing the video is just adds that touch, and people feel they know you a little better than if they just heard your voice on the phone. So it adds to the confidence that somebody gets, even when they've got the data all in front of them.
Absolutely. So, this is the part where I do the really cheesy pitch and say, don't take it from us.
Yeah.
But we actually have a clip here that we wanted to show you from friends of ours over at Crestron. And for those of you who are not familiar, Crestron's an absolutely massive global company. And they cover so many different things in terms of their business portfolio, that, we spoke with them a little bit about how video has been critical to their business. So let's jump into that clip and we'll come back and talk about it.
We have regular communications where we need to reach our dealers or our consultants or our end users, and video is a key part of that.
We actually use video Crestron-wide. We use it a lot internally. We use it to train our sales team. We use it to talk to our customers via webinars or techinars. We use video to share information with employees across our internal digital display. It really is a main cornerstone of how we communicate at Crestron.
Yeah, and I think some great points in there, and for us as Epiphan, we basically could say we do the same things. But again, this isn't a question of it's only something for smaller, more dynamic companies necessarily. It can also be scaled to any size you want, big or small. It's just a question of what you want to do with it and the goal. And we have a bunch more stuff about that. I think we're publishing soon about talking with Crestron about that. But like I said, they're everywhere. They have offices and employees everywhere, and being able to unify all of that communication and deliver it as one message can be very important. And they do manage that, and they do it through video, in, as they were mentioning in that clip. whether it's the training, the webinar, the techinar, that kind of thing, both internally and externally, is of huge value.
Yeah, and I think they're one of the companies that probably checks every box of what we started with, right? The town hall meetings, the training for employees and internal messaging, as well as all the external applications. So not just talking within the company, but really reaching out beyond the company to end customers, to sales channel partners, to everyone external to the company. They're trying to make sure it's as visual as possible. And, like us, they are a technology company, and their business is highly routed in video. So it's a natural fit for them. But they're a great example of how any large company can leverage these same kind of tools to reach well beyond kind of the employees and the people in the company and really start to reach out.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
so
what,
we have been talking about, internal stuff, a lot up until this point. So let's dive into those external applications that you mentioned there, Dave.
sure.
And how do we do this to really engage with customers and clients? And so we do have some stats to talk about this. And I was actually looking at an article earlier, looking at the increase of live streaming traffic, since all of this COVID stuff started, and the numbers are impressive, and these kind of reflect it as well. Um, you know, what we're even if we're just embedding video onto a landing page of a website, for a particular product, there has been some studies here, and one of them, it increased traffic by 300% in one study just by putting video on a landing page. Um, it doubled the time spent on a page. That's huge. And then more importantly, it boosted conversion by 80%. That's a huge number. And so much of today's world is digital, it's online. We rely on the content of our websites to, sell, and attract clients. These numbers, it's pretty hard to argue with this. If you're running a business that requires that for your marketing effort, and just turning around and saying, hey, let's get one one video on one landing page and these are the results, theoretically, that's massive.
Yeah.
That's a huge win.
And these things compound, right? I mean, the first one is I'm bringing more traffic just by having that video content there. And the last one is, of that extra, 300% of traffic, I've got even more, a higher percentage of those converting, meaning they're engaging in the sales process, right? Either
Yeah.
purchasing product or going to the next step. And that's a really important metric to say, not only am I bringing more people to learn about my products or my services on my website, but more of the people who show up are following up and becoming customers. And so, I mean, it's those two things really magnify one another, to really amplify the message that you have on that landing page and catapult that sale forward.
Yeah, and I think that circles back around to, in the beginning, we were talking about how, leveraging video in these different ways it's simply more engaging than reading a block of text. And the example I gave about a Kickstarter, again, is an prime example of exactly this. If you didn't have a more engaging piece of content like a video on something like that, you just simply would move along and you wouldn't be interested in it. The Of course, you still have to make sure the content is good. If the
Always.
video is no good, it won't help. But that's a huge part of this equation as well.
Yeah, really the struggle is to say, hey, I've got great content. How do I get people, A, to find it, and B, to kind of engage it long enough for it really to sink in? And so the content's got to be good to start with. But once you have that, there's still a huge battle to say, how do I get it in front of many people? And how do I get them to spend enough time with it that it makes a difference?
Yeah,
And this chart is really just showing the video goes a long way to helping with both of those things.
absolutely. So part of that, of course, is the sales enablement, and the different ways that this can assist your team.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, I think on the enablement side, there's kind of two distinct elements. One, we talked a little bit about the training and onboarding and that kind of thing. So especially if you're a large organization with a distributed sales team, keeping that sales team up to date with what what your products and services are, what successes you're having with customers, how they can repeat those or leverage those. Those are all really important things. And again, if people are engaging more on video content, more of your salespeople are going to spend more time on those messages, internalize that more, and be better equipped to go and sell. On the other side, it's also reaching out. It's allowing either the sales team or some other part of the organization to reach out directly to the end customer as part of that sales process. So, it's one thing to get the team ready, but video also really helps when you're reaching out to that end customer. It makes it more personable and it draws them in. It makes it more engaging for them. So I think, that sales enablement goes two ways. It's getting your sales team ready and making sure they're engaged, and then providing that same level of engagement in the customer meeting itself.
Absolutely. I mean, a number of years ago, we engaged in doing much more online demos of some of our products, organized by the sales team with customers directly all over the world, and bringing in the right expertise along with the sales team into those calls. And, the conversion rates after doing that was huge in comparison to just letting people browse on their own, or even taking a cold call from a salesperson. Those things will never go away. They still have their huge advantages, but taking it to that next level of even just getting in a WebEx or a Zoom call or a Google Meet call or whatever, and just being more hands-on and being able to guide the customer through certain questions it's much more effective when you can back it up with video. Maybe that's physically demonstrating the product. Maybe if your product is of that nature, that makes a huge difference. If it's a very specialized one, it might be a specific how-to. If they have a question of how do I make your product do job X, and you can demonstrate that live in a video, totally changes everything, because they have much more confidence moving forward more quickly with the sales process and the purchasing process, having seen that and having seen it demonstrated instead of being left to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, and I think here especially, the right mix of VOD content with live demonstration really makes this a powerful way to get a customer from wondering about your product to deciding on your product. And that's certainly what we saw was, like you mentioned, it could be a simple how-to. It could be a number of different introductory videos to your products and services that gives them a general idea, but they're always going to have specific questions that go, oh, in my environment, will it work this way? Or I want to use it slightly differently, or I'd like to understand how many other customers are doing what I'm doing. And there's lots of concerns that a potential customer can have before they make that purchase. So getting them kind of appetized, get that appetizer out there, which is the VOD, that gets them interested, gives them enough information. They go, hey, yeah, this is something that's quite interesting. And then following it up with a live experience to be able to go in and then say, all right, let me give you a live demo. Let me walk you through that and answer your questions. What we noticed, we got feedback very early from our sales channel, specifically on Pearl, but it applies to all our products and services, was the quote was, once I can get this product in front of the customer and walk them through it, they're much more, tendency to buy is much, much higher, because now they're familiar with the product, their questions are answered. And that goes for all kinds of different products. It's not unique to us, but we did set up a studio specifically for that, because we said, well, we can't travel to every customer around the world. They're all over the place. So what's the next best thing? And that combination of VOD assets they can watch in their own time, just to get familiar and get basic questions answered, followed up by a live one where you can then really get into the specifics of that customer and understand what they need. It's a great combination. And again, it can be done by voice, but it's so much more effective when it's video based. And we see tons of companies going to these kind of customer outreach and demos and that kind of thing.
Exactly. So, those types of customer outreach, and we do all of these ourselves, live streaming product launches. I think we're all familiar with that, whether it's an Apple or a Samsung or companies of that size. When they have a new phone or whatever it is, those are always live streamed now for everyone to see, and they get hundreds of millions of views on those live streams. And that's a much quicker way of delivering it. That's actually a funny example where, in the past, a company might do a press release, wait for the media to pick it up and publish it. And that could be a delay. Whereas now they live stream it themselves and the media tunes into the live stream instead of waiting for the press release. And so there's a total dynamic change there on the very upper end of those companies. But even at the smaller end, why deal with a press release if you're talking about new features or new product updates that are primarily targeting your existing customers? You can just do it yourself. You can just do a live stream or a webinar to your contact list of customers and deliver that. Doing the live demos, as we've been talking about, fielding questions very specifically. In the past few weeks, I've done some webinars specifically around the Pearl products, just diving into them, getting as virtual hands-on as you possibly can, and doing essentially the same thing I would do if I was sitting in a room with those individuals. And that has been very successful. And then, of course, all of this can help when you translate it into engaging social media content. And one of the things we do is a weekly live stream with different subject matter every week, talking about different things, conceptual or physical, and really just engaging that, putting that out on social media. And that's actually been a huge benefit of our sales channel partners taking that material and reusing it to their customers. And that's made a big difference in many cases as well. So all of these different types, reaching out to your customers directly, again, as this world becomes much more global, it also becomes much more direct in relationships. And so making sure that this content is out there from the source can be a big benefit. So again, I mentioned we do our live show, our Live at Epiphan show. We do that every Thursday at 3:00 Eastern. And we're always talking about all kinds of different things related to streaming and things like that. But another example of that is our partners and friends over at Video Guys. Every Tuesday at 2:00 Eastern, they do their Newsday Tuesday, where they're featuring product that they sell and their experience with it. They aren't just saying, "Hey, this is new to the catalog, come buy it." No, they're actually diving into it, getting hands-on with it so that their customers can better understand it and leverage it. And so that's another example of this is, a sales channel that is showcasing products every week, answering questions, diving into it, and addressing specific industries with those products. And they're very successful in that as well.
Yeah, and they also aggregate. I mean, literally, they're aggregating product, right? So people have one place to go shop for similar kind of product, but they bring the manufacturers not only their products, but the manufacturers themselves into their live show, and they'll invite them in and say, "Okay, this week we're going to talk with Epiphan about this and that." So it allows their customers to feel a more direct connection to the manufacturers, and to be able to put the manufacturers right in front of the customer. And that's really valuable. And they've been doing that for quite a while. We do our live show to talk directly with our customers and establish that kind of rapport and conversation. It's really important that customers, we talked about it earlier with investors, they want to know who are the people I'm entrusting with my dollars before I invest in this company. It's not to the same degree when you're buying a product, but that is still part of the purchasing decision, is who am I purchasing this from? Are they a good, reputable company? And allowing some of your personality of the company to get through in the social media world allows them to get familiar with who you are as a company and as people. And that goes a long way to swaying them between your product and somebody else's. So it's a very effective sales tool for sure.
Absolutely. So another one that we wanted to focus on today, and this is one that we've seen emerging very rapidly in the past couple of years, and I think is going to continue in a big way. And that's user experience labs, UX, and focus groups and things like that. Of course, focus groups has been something that's been going on since the dawn of business time, I suppose. But it's much more involved now. I remember, as a kid participating in television focus groups. You go in, you see a pilot, you say whether or not you like, and that's the traditional way. But we don't have to do that in a room anymore. We don't have to go to some weird ballroom in a hotel with a whole bunch of strangers that you had to get tickets for and all. Those days are gone. We don't have to do that anymore. We can leverage video and specific lab spaces or even mobile lab spaces to do this on your own without having to hire a third party company. Or in some cases, you do want a third party company that's better equipped to do it. And so today's technology with video can really improve this. And we've seen our Pearl products used in these areas in big ways. So just simplifying that experience, making it more usable. And with something like a Pearl, a hardware encoder, you're bringing in multiple video signals, cameras, different devices with video outputs, bringing that all together. And whether it's in a single location to, an observation room next door, or live streaming it so that someone in an office on the other side of the world is also participating in that exact same, study, without physically being present, can make a big difference. And again, this can be an investor perspective or an engineering perspective. There's lots of different ways that leveraging video as part of these study groups really expands the horizons of what you can do.
Yeah, this was, I would say, a bit of a surprise for us. This wasn't a market we initially targeted with Pearl. It's not a use case that we really had in mind, but it took off very quickly once Pearl came to market. People were saying, hey, I'm using this for UX because I can record multiple cameras, I can combine them, I can stream it out so that the development team that developed the software, which is being tested, can actually watch the usability tests in real time. And we really weren't targeting that kind of use case with Pearl when we first imagined it, but it's been a very, very popular one, and we see more and more as technology advances. People are interacting with devices more and more on a daily basis for everything, and really what differentiates a lot of those products is the usability, right? Mm-hmm. How easy is it for a given demographic to be able to pick that device up and know what to do with it immediately? And I would say, everybody kind of looks at the demographic as the younger kids catch on very quickly. For those of us who are not that young, it's a little tougher. And, for the elderly, it's even harder. So UX design is more important than ever as things get more and more technology based. And we see many companies doing their own UX research to make sure that before they bring their products to market, they've got the usability among the demographics, and testing with many demographics to make sure that it works across, whether it be geography or culture or age. There's all kinds of range that you want to test against just to make sure you're covering your bases and your UI makes sense to all of the groups that you're targeting. So it's a really growing field, and it's been an interesting one for us to participate in.
Yeah, and engineers are great; they're awesome, but they see things usually a little differently than non-engineers do, and making sure that that's understood and translated can be the job of the UX lab. So,
yeah.
So one of the ways that we can tackle kind of all of the above, if you will, is by leveraging studio spaces. Now, right now with many people working from home under current conditions, this is maybe not an immediate thing, but when we start to get back to it into the offices, and this is something we've been doing for years now, is looking at using on-premise dedicated specific video studio spaces, purpose-built for the productions that you want to produce. This can result in huge value. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but the main thing is that when you're creating video, there's a lot of factors to it. You obviously want it to be visually appealing, and sometimes that means using green screens or not. Sometimes it's a practical set. Sometimes it always involves lighting being super critical. You can't just shoot anything in a dark room. No one will see it. You want decent quality cameras generally to make sure that you're starting at the highest point you possibly can, and not, starting low and delivering something that's weak from the beginning. So high-end cameras can be important. You don't have to go completely crazy on it, especially not at first. Having lots of monitors for the talent to understand what's going on for organization, if someone's functioning as a producer, making sure they have the tools they need. lighting is super critical. And then, generally speaking, if you can have something like a hardware encoder, like a Pearl is a great example, anchoring that studio space, it means that in some cases you can make it a one button studio where anyone can walk in, push a button, and make a video, record it, and walk away, and that's it. That's all they have to do. And that's obviously a more advanced setup, but making it easy to use where people don't have to understand, deep broadcast video production techniques and things like that will make it more usable, more likely to be used, and more successful. So this is actually a picture that we're showing here, of one space that we had set up, and it was designed as a multi-use. So there was some green screens in there. There was lots of variable lighting techniques going on. There was video walls and screens around, and lots of gear to play with. But it made it very usable for shooting tutorial videos, doing our weekly live show, and things like that.
I
The other
think
way,
I was going to say one of the key elements is that space is kind of dedicated and always available, right? Because
right,
if you need to set up the cameras and set up the lighting and do all of this each time, you're just not going to do it very often. And then, when you look at your list of how have I used video in my business, it's going to be back to only infrequently for the really big events. The key value of one of these studios is if you can do it in a way, like you said, that's almost, push button, one button. You walk in, the message you want to deliver, how you want to deliver it. You don't want to worry about the technology. If you can get there, and it is not that difficult to get there these days, it really provides a lot of value so that anyone, whether it's a marketing manager with a product message or it's a customer support person that wants to put a quick how-to or tutorial, anyone can walk in there quickly, get that video made or shoot it live. It really adds to it. So that's the value of the dedicated space, is just making sure it's kind of an always on or always available kind of space that you can walk into and not worry about the technology. Just get your message across.
yeah, and you can fine tune it, right? You can look at backgrounds, whether real physical backgrounds or looking at virtual ones with green screens. We've said 1,000 times on all of our content, I think, video, especially in the live streaming world, video being good quality is important, but more importantly, audio needs to be good. So when you have a dedicated space, one thing you can control and ensure is going to deliver the best possible audio quality, you can look at doing things like acoustic treatments on walls and choosing things and tuning the audio properly so that, again, no matter what, you can walk into that room and deliver great audio. Far too often I've been on Zoom calls with people where they have a laptop set up in their kitchen working from home, and it's just an echoey, tinny sounding mess. Or there's background noises, dogs barking and children screaming or whatever it is. It's distracting and it takes away from what you're trying to deliver. So having a dedicated space where you can control those variables makes a big difference in making sure that the content you're delivering is ultimately very high quality, both visually and with audio.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, it doesn't have to break the bank and it can be scaled up. We did that ourselves. We started, I think 2014, we built our first studio to do product demos from and that kind of thing. And we started very small, very simple. And then we learned and said, hey, these are some things we'd like to tweak. And maybe we get more value if we swapped it this way. And acoustic treatment was one of those things. We started in that room and went, wow, the audio is horrible in here. We need to do something. Luckily, it's not all that expensive. So you can
No.
do it well without going crazy, and build up slowly to learn what do I need. And it's like anything, there's a diminishing returns, right? A little bit of investment gets you a lot away. And then as you invest more and more in higher end equipment or this or that, yes, it's better, but it's not going to make the same difference that first acoustic treatment you did to your room did. As simple as that was, going really sophisticated will make it better, but only to a small degree. So you can really get started quite quickly and fairly economically if you kind of want to get going. It's not a huge hurdle to jump over to get started and do it well.
Absolutely. So this is actually a picture of our studio today, which is, I guess, in a way, the third revision of of our studio space.
Yes.
And again, it's still not a huge space. It's still, a very usable but not a massive space. It's not taking up a huge square footage of our office space, but it's dedicated to this, which means, we can look at more specific acoustic treatments. We can look at maybe, setting things up to have specific furniture, lighting, audio setups, cameras more permanently mounted. And we changed this quite a bit. We have the space to accommodate even putting in a green screen if we want to, but we've also allowed it to have some space for practical set in behind as well.
Okay.
So, you'll notice here, I'll mention a few things, and this is one option, but we even changed this ourselves quite a bit. We have it set up here with a shotgun mic on a boom over top of someone doing a presentation. If we have multiple people, we might use lavalier microphones clipped to those people. We have a main camera at the front. In that case, it's a Zcam E2, I believe, in this shot, which actually has some remote control abilities to it. So it's a small, compact camera that gives us great quality video. Interchangeable lenses on it, so we can really fine tune it for what we need. And then, beyond that, from the presenter's perspective, there's confidence monitors, there's and a control booth with a view of someone who might be functioning as a producer if you have someone for that type of content that day. Extra gear on the shelf in case they need to mix it up. Making sure that's available. I think a big one is definitely that we evolved into was adding the control booth. Again, that doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be the newsroom kind of thing. It can really be a fairly simplified, straightforward setup. And in our case, some displays and monitors for our producers, hardware encoders sitting there, some computers for various things they might need, audio control, and that's pretty much it. And, again, they're isolated from the main stage, if you will, isolated from the rest of the office, to make sure that we can control those variables I was mentioning earlier. So this can be it doesn't have to be crazy. I would say this is still not even at the spectacle level. When we mentioned
No, not
simple
at
to
all.
spectacle, I would say this is still on more simple end, but it is up from the base. So we actually, you'll see in a shot right now, this is a live shot of that studio from kind of an overhead, God cam, if you will, in the top corner. That is a live shot. Of course, no one's in our studio right now, but that is a live shot that we can pull in and engage with and use. So, there's a lot of ways to do this. This is just one example. And like I say, this is maybe revision 3 of what we've done. I'm sure there will be more revisions for us in the future as we learn more, evolve it more, and choose to do different things.
Yeah, and a lot of those revisions were driven not necessarily by upgrading gear, but it became more multi-purpose. The first purpose for our studio was just product demos. That was what we built it for. And then we realized, hey, we want to do marketing videos. We want to be able to do a live show. So that was the second studio was, okay, let's accommodate something that can do a live show rather than just product demos. And then as we evolved more, again, we got a little fancier. We have that little control room that separates the producer from the live set. Those are nice things to have. But as you use it for more and more purposes, that's how your studio will start to evolve. And we've really evolved it because we found so much value in creating how-to videos and doing a live show and still doing product demos. And so it really did grow as our appetite for using video grew. And as you said, we've kept it quite reasonable. It's really not an elaborate studio, but it's certainly more than adequate for what we need.
Yeah. So if you're interested in learning more about building on-premise studios, next Wednesday, March 20th, at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we are doing another webinar. So if you haven't checked out the epiphan.com/webinars page, feel free to do so and sign up for that webinar. We're going to be talking about building on-premise video studios in much more detail. So that's next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. You could say same bad time, same bad channel, and we'll be diving into that. If you haven't joined us for any of our previous webinars or want to look at what we have coming up, you can sign up at epiphan.com/webinars, and you'll see all of the previous ones as well as ones upcoming. So, definitely we'll be going into more detail there. So another...
Oh, I was going to say, I think the current poll we have going right now is about exactly this. Do you have a live or a dedicated space to do live event production or video recording?
Yeah, so weigh in on that one. We also had one that went up just before that about how often do you do customer outreach with video. So weigh in on those polls as well. Just open the poll panel and vote on those. One of the next sections we wanted to touch on where video can be really important is live event production. Now, this is obviously a huge umbrella term that covers many, many different things. Conferences, trade shows, arts and entertainment, all these different things. Live event production is a big one to dissect, but it covers a huge number of things. And the general rule of thumb underneath that, regardless of where it might be, it's pretty common. So generally, what we're trying to do is bring people together. When we can record and live stream events, we can increase our revenue by bringing more people in, as we talked about those statistics earlier. We can create high value on-demand assets that we can reuse over and over again. So live streaming and recording your events can be a real win in a lot of different categories. And it doesn't have to be a huge addition to what you are already doing in those live events.
Right.
There's a lot of ways to deliver this cost effectively. One of the ways we see this sometimes, hopefully, you're popular enough that you fill a room and you run out of space and you need some contingency. Running overflow rooms can be even easier. If you're already shooting video, you're already planning and equipping yourself to do that, sending it to an overflow room, whether physically next door or virtually next door in another location, becomes very easy. And this can be very, very important when we want to deliver a conference or something along those lines. So there's a lot of ways to do this as well. Some people do it with a physical wire, but again, you might want more production value to it for mixing and switching. One example I see all the time is trying to do something with a single camera, where that camera is trying to shoot a presenter and maybe a projector screen at the same time. And cameras aren't good at that because you can't get both perfect at the same time. Their lighting just doesn't work. So, using a much more sophisticated video production setup where you can have, the native signal of that presentation and cameras mixing and switching, much like you guys are seeing in our webinar right now. That's exactly what you could deliver to an overflow room. So that can be a value. Another one, and Crestron actually touched on this in their clips there, was digital signage with live elements. If you have a huge office complex, or maybe it's a university campus and you have screens distributed everywhere, being able to put the live stream up on those screens can help deliver it to more people. If you think about it, when you go to a sporting event, especially here, if we go to a hockey game, even if you take a break to go to the washroom, there's screens in the bathroom so that you know what's happening in the game while you're taking that break, waiting in line for another beer or something like that. And we kind of dismiss those offhand as just conveniences, but if you translate that into your corporate structure, where people are just walking in the hall or whatever, and you're delivering that content, it makes a big difference. So the other thing we've seen a lot is, if it's a big conference and there's video screens outside of different rooms, letting attendees know that they're headed to the right room at the right time, whether maybe it's just a schedule posted, but ideally it's a live stream of what's happening in that room, lets them know who's speaking currently and whether or not they belong in there or not. We've
Yep.
seen that a lot. Of course, as I mentioned, if they have to step out for some reason, maybe they have to step out to take a phone call in the hallway, having a screen there lets them be able to remain engaged, keep pace with what's going on. So this can be a huge area for those things. So I know we were a little long getting to the questions. We do have a bunch of questions that I want to address. So I'm going to go through some of these. For those of you who have asked questions, certainly appreciate that. And it looks like a lot of people have discovered the upvoting part of that, which is great. So weigh in on those questions if you're looking at the Q&A panel. Use the upvotes, and I will definitely be addressing the most upvoted ones first. So one of the first ones is, what kind of camera do you recommend? And this can be an interesting one depending on the environment. I think there's definitely a big difference between what you might be choosing to use today if you're working in social isolation with what you might be able to do at home versus what you would choose ultimately for a studio space. But there are some crossovers there. And I would definitely recommend looking at investing in those products that are going to let you cross over. So there was a sub question to that of, and what kind of camera are you using for this video? So I'm using a Sony A5100 mirrorless APS-C sensor camera running through a capture card into our conferencing tool for Dave and I to join together. Dave, I believe you're using a Panasonic Handycam style camera on your end.
Yep.
Similar idea. Exactly. It's a similar idea. I think in both of those cases, those cameras could represent crossovers to be usable in a larger video space. Although we're each in our home offices at the moment, you can definitely expand with both of those cameras. In the case of the Sony, it's an interchangeable lens. So if I move it to another space where the lens that it came with is not going to suit that space, I could change it and get more out of it. We actually use an A6300 in our studio space a lot, but it also is small enough that you can easily take it on the road with you to shoot in remote locations. So that's an example of a great choice to make for a camera, something that's going to be flexible. When you're investing money into it, make sure it's going to serve multiple purposes is my recommendation as a tech support guy.
Yeah. You also mentioned earlier, we do have a Z cam in our studio, and one of the advantages there is that it's remotely controllable. And although the producer may only be a few feet away, they're literally outside of the room. They're on the other side, so they can't get their hands on the camera to adjust things. So it really depends on the scenario you're in. You need to figure out, are you going to be in an environment where someone can always touch and handle the camera, or do you need to be able to remotely control that camera in the environment that you want to shoot in? And for us, most of the time we could have hands on the camera, but in that studio environment, we much prefer to have that separation so that the people who are producing the show can speak at a normal volume and not bleed their audio into our mics and that kind of thing. So it does offer that advantage.
Yeah, and I would note that if you're looking at a remotely controlled camera like the Zcam, or what I've seen many times in larger studio spaces than ours, using PTZ cameras, if they're connected to your network, there are ways that you can control that from basically anywhere in the world, so that even under current conditions today, maybe one person can get permission to go into your office and use the studio, and that's your talent, and your producer is sitting at home. If you choose the right equipment there, they could be remotely controlling everything, including the cameras from their home. So that's a consideration as well. There's no single answer to which camera we recommend, because it will depend on what you want. But starting out, I would highly recommend something like a Sony A5100 as a great camera to start with for both your home office through a capture card and to translate into a small, medium-sized studio. Let's see. There was another question here from Mark. With basically a director in another state, is there a good way to allow the director to see an IP multi-view with cameras and sources and actually direct cameras from afar? Mark, there definitely are ways to do that. You it you know we've actually participated in helping to produce an entire 5-day online conference that had keynotes and panels and everything like that. Right now, today, that usually ends up mixing a variety of tools, including video conferencing tools like Zoom and hardware live streaming encoders like a Pearl, to bring all those signals together and deliver that content ultimately. If you look back at some of our webinars, actually, even just yesterday, we did one about live conferences. That will give you a much deeper look into that kind of thing and how you can leverage that. Long term, of course, outside of the current isolation stuff we might be under, just choosing tools that are going to allow you to remotely control them over a network can be a big benefit. There are audio mixers that can do that. There's video switchers that can do that. And of course, there are cameras that can do that. Our own Pearl encoders can do that remotely through the cloud very easily from anywhere. So those are good options. You had a sub question there on latency. I mean, that'll vary, but generally, with the right tools, it can be very low and still be effective in the right hands. Mark, you also asked about bandwidth. What is the minimum for for things to be robust? Again, it depends. If you're talking about a one-to-many live stream, let's take, for example, what we're doing today. Dave and I are speaking to, in a Zoom meeting. That Zoom meeting is then being fed into our hardware encoder that's sitting in the studio we showed you earlier, and it's ultimately sending the live stream to Crowdcast. The reason we're doing that is that the bandwidth at that site at our office is much, much more robust than either Dave and I have at our homes. And it means that becomes our backbone. So we can stream out of there at a much higher bit rate, do all the mixing and switching and everything. In terms of the minimum you would need there, let's say you want to live stream at full HD, at good quality, to, let's say, single destination. You might be somewhere between 5 and 6 megabit for your encoding bit rate. My rule of thumb is multiply by 1 or 1.5 or by 2 ideally. That's the minimum bandwidth you want to support that. So somewhere between 10 and 12 megabit is a good minimum. Of course, you always want your network to be robust whenever you're talking about live streaming, that it's not going to go down is a huge part of that. That's going to vary geographically depending on where you are and what you have available. Glenn asked, Dave, what type of mic are you using? He says that he finds it sounds very tinny. So maybe you could tell us what audio you're using on your side.
Yeah, at home here, I'm just using a USB. It's more of a desktop mic that's more for video conferencing kind of application than kind of a high-end microphone. So if we were doing any kind of marketing video, voiceover, or that kind of stuff, this would not be the mic that I would choose. But it is very convenient because it sits pretty much flat on my desk and allows me to work in a very natural way without having kind of a mic stand kind of in my space or in my face.
Yeah.
So I prefer that from a convenience point of view, but yes, you're right. It is not the highest quality mic for audio quality.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say what I'm using is necessarily the highest quality, but what I'm doing is kind of less convenient when I'm doing these webinars. Day to day, when I'm just taking phone calls and doing general meetings, I wear a headset with a boom mic because it's more convenient to still use my mouse and keyboard and do everything. When I'm doing these webinars, I do use a mic on a stand. I'll try to raise it up here. I use a Blue Yeti on a stand, but I could not type and do things very effectively, day to day with that setup, but it does increase the quality of the audio for this kind of application. So, it depends on what you have on hand. Again, if I was in a studio space, we'd probably be using wireless lav mics on our lapels, just to improve that. Question here, George, what kind of light do you use? And Dave's picture is sharp, but the lighting isn't quite as good, I guess. Yeah, so definitely the setups are very different. I'll pull back the curtain here for a moment. and let you all see what I actually look like. So in my case, I'm using a green screen behind me. I have some natural light in the room, but I also supplement that with 3 or 4 different points of lighting in my room to make sure the green screen is lit effectively. That includes stuff that's on the floor that's shooting up onto the green screen and key lights. Anyway, it's much more complicated, but I have a total of 3 LED lights and some ambient warmer light, as well as some natural light coming through a window in my home office here. And that's basically what I'm using. Um, and because I have the green screen, I can have a lot more fun with doing background replacements and stuff like that. Dave's a much more practical setup.
Yeah, this is all natural light. So I have a window just to the side of me. And then I have just a piece of foam core that's propped up beside me. I can kind of bring it almost into the frame here. That's just reflecting some of that light back in. So I am very much dependent on the light that's coming through my window. And this happens to be just about the worst time of day for that light, because the sun is coming around to the point where it's almost coming directly in the window. And that kind of gives a very low contrast as the light bounces all over this room. There's not a lot of contrast. So unlike George, I don't have a single kind of key light that's directional. So my lighting is a little more low contrast, but it is extremely low budget. I am just a piece of foam core and an open window. So it's pretty simple.
Yeah, but we are always looking at improving our home setups. For example, if you look at some of our earlier webinars, I was just using a Logitech C920 camera. I've now upgraded to the Sony. So there's ways to evolve your setup as you learn more about what you're doing and leveraging that.
Yeah, and
And
certainly,
lighting is a big one.
yeah, we were in the process of creating, a marketing video that we were going to post online and that kind of thing, rather than this kind of conferencing webinar kind of environment. I certainly wouldn't be using this lighting, and certainly I'm very dependent on time of day. If this was 9:00 p.m. my time instead of 3:00 p.m. my time, this light won't work at
Dark.
all. So
Yeah.
natural lighting is really not usually the way to go. I like it because it's a great, similar to my microphone. I'm set up here more for the convenience of the way that I work,
Yeah.
because I am at home. This is kind of my home office. But if I was really doing something, for the studio or for our marketing videos, then I would be either in a studio or I would bring in lighting into here to make it a little more directional and a little better contrast.
Absolutely. So I saw a couple questions in here. One from Pedro asking, is it possible to share the presentation with the audience? I can't do that through Crowdcast, but if you want to send us an email just to info@epiphan.com, and I'll have that up on a slide in a few moments. Info at Epiphan, EPIPHAN.com. Send us an email requesting that, and we'll try to get that into your hands. So one person was also asking, what's the range of investment required for the setup for video at a corporate level? That can be a big range, to be honest. And if I recall, the person asking this, if I'm just trying to scroll back through chat, because I seem to recall this person was also Canadian. So I can speak more directly to that in some ways in Canadian dollars. For example, the Sony A5100 typically is, again, it's a great entry-level camera for a variety of different things. That usually retails in Canada new for about $600. That's your camera. Audio-wise, something like a Blue Yeti or a shotgun microphone, that could be $100, $200 for audio. Doesn't have to be huge. So at a very minimal level, if you add a capture card to that equation, you might be in maybe the $1,200 range. If you start moving into hardware encoders like pearls, then you're adding, a few $1,000s as well. Lighting, obviously, but certainly I think it's very possible to start at that $1,200 to $1,500 range to start out. And from there, the sky's the limit, quite frankly. But, you can make an extremely effective studio, much like we have in our office we were showing earlier, you know, you could probably deliver that in the $8,000 to $10,000 range and run with that for a very long time. And again, sky's always the limit. So um, let's see. There's a question here. The software that you're using for the graphics and a different camera. I'm not sure I understand that question, but there's a number of things we've been doing in uh, our stream here. So as I mentioned, Dave and I are participating in a Zoom call. The slides you've been seeing, I'm hosting and controlling through the Zoom call as well. But you've also seen our lower thirds come in with our names and things like that. That's being done at our hardware encoder level, where we're bringing those slides into our Pearl 2 over NDI from New Blue Titler, which is a titling software. And our producer, Cameron, who's hiding in the background, is doing all of that from a production standpoint. So there's a number of tools that work here, and it's a very easy way of doing it to make a more dynamic piece. Saul was asking, is there a hardware interface for switching on the Pearl 2? Yes, there's two physical ways of doing that. You can do it on the touch screen of the Pearl 2. You can also, in a recent update, enable the local console on the HDMI output of a Pearl 2 and connect a mouse and keyboard over USB. That'll give you full administrative access to the Pearl on a local console level, and you can do the switching there as well using your mouse and keyboard. So there's two different ways of doing that. Of course, you can also do it over the network. You can do it through the cloud. There's lots of ways of controlling it.
And we've seen people just taking, generic controllers, push button kind of controllers, and just programming them up. So the API is completely open. So if there's a controller that you're used to using or you enjoy using and it's programmable, you can easily, control the Pearl from that as well. The API is completely open. So programming those, if you do any programming at all, it's quite simple.
Yeah, some people have just used tablets accessing the web UI, which in a way becomes physical, even if they're sitting in front of the Pearl. Or speaking of Crestron again, Crestron has a driver module for their control systems that can integrate with the Pearl. So you could have a Crestron touch panel on the wall that will allow you some switching through that touch panel as well. So there's a number of ways of doing that. So there was another question here. Who should pay the preliminary presentation for a new product, the retailer or the interested corporations? I'm not sure I understand that question. Maybe you can clarify in chat if you're still there. I'm not sure I actually understand that question. I can speak to the fact that as a manufacturer, as Epiphan, when it comes to creating our content, although our partners are allowed to reuse that content, we're the ones who are fronting the cost for generating it. We see the payoff coming later by increased sales by giving them those tools. So I guess it depends on which way around you want to look at it, if I'm understanding that question. And the last question here was, what software allows you to key out a green screen in the background? There's a lot of ways to do that. If you're using Zoom, Zoom has its own background replacement for green screens. So that's an easy one. It'll even work on non-green screens as long as it's kind of all one color. But of course, if you're looking at running software for video production, OBS, Wirecast, vMix, any of these have chroma key options. And then, of course, if you're using a hardware encoder like our Pearl 2, it also does chroma keying. So it could key out the green screen there as well. So depends on which approach you're taking. Again, starting out the very basic level, if you're doing things just within video conferencing, then some have it, some don't, but Zoom definitely does for background replacement. I know Skype has a fairly rudimentary one. The Zoom one definitely works way better. But some of them, like Google Meet and a few others, don't have it at all. So if that's important to you, choose wisely, I suppose. All right. That pretty much covers it for the questions. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you do have any other last minute questions, throw them into chat or into the QA very quickly here. And of course, if you haven't had a chance to weigh in on any of our polls, feel free to do that. The last one that went up was asking the question, has your organization ever live streamed or recorded an event? So before you go, weigh in on that one. As mentioned in chat there as well, if you'd like a copy of the presentation or have any further questions going forward, send us an email, info@epiphan.com. If you're interested in any of the Epiphan products we've talked about capture cards and our hardware encoders, go to our website, epiphan.com/products. And Nolan is just asking chat, will there be a recording? Yes, we post all of our webinars after they're finished to the webinar page on our website. So epiphan.com/webinars. We do post them all there after they're completed. So that one should be up later today. Latest tomorrow, but probably later today. So check that out. You'll also find all the back catalog there of all the other ones we've been doing. So there's since we've been, essentially in isolation since early March, we've been generating a lot of these. So feel free to go back and check those out and see if there's any other ones that pique your interest. So I think that'll do it for today. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thanks, Dave, for joining me on this webinar. As mentioned, we do our live show every Thursday, which is tomorrow, 3:00 Eastern time. And we'll be talking about something that slips my mind right now, and someone's going to be mad at me for forgetting.
Zoom audio tips and tricks.
Yes, audio tips and tricks for this. So we'll be talking about what some people were asking about today, things to improve the audio within various things. So tune in tomorrow live at Epiphan on YouTube or Facebook or even Twitch. You can follow us on Facebook and YouTube to find those, and that'll be at 3:00 Eastern. And then next week, we have more webinars coming up as well, including the one I mentioned earlier, talking about on-premise studio setups. So check out, again, the webinar page, and we sign up for those if you're interested. And yeah, that'll do it for us. Thank you so much.